Namaste! Story time. Now, I know I have already narrated one story from this book, but I really want to narrate one more. It's a really good book. So, this story is called The Devil Wears Khadi, the unmasking of Romesh Sharma. Romesh, Romesh. Okay, so who was a Romesh Sharma? One day, IPS officer Neeraj Kumar, working in CBI at that time, got an information that a helicopter is parked on the lawns of a Chhatarpur farmhouse. Now, there are many huge, luxurious, hyper super farmhouses on the outskirts of Delhi. So the Chhatarpur farmhouse was big, manicured lawns, lovely farmhouse, and it was quite common for a Mercedes or a BMW to be parked on the lawns of a farmhouse, but not a helicopter, and definitely not in the 1990s. So when IPS officer Neeraj Kumar got the information that a helicopter was parked on the lawns of a Chhatarpur farmhouse, he decided to investigate it further. He came to know that the said farmhouse, belonged to a man called Romesh Sharma. Like I said, Romesh. Who was Romesh Sharma? Romesh Sharma was the right hand of Abu Salim, working from Uttar Pradesh. So, Neeraj Kumar got the landline number. Those were the good old days of the landline, We all had one. So he got the landline number of the farmhouse and the landline number of Romesh Sharma's other house at Mayfair and started tapping both of them. They also started keeping tabs on who is visiting these farmhouse, who comes to meet, whom he goes to meet, when, where, everything. The surveillance took months together. They noted that Romesh Sharma and Abu Salim spoke to each other very, very, very regularly. And it was usually about kidnapping for ransom or grabbing this or that illegal property. They once overheard Abu Salim and Romesh Sharma settle a dispute between Anand Jain of Reliance Group and Rajendra Bantia, a Mumbai-based stockbroker. So, big names, and Abu Salim and Romesh Sharma were, settling disputes, settling kidnapping ransom, grabbing disputed properties, and all the usual stuff. So, on the one hand, while Romesh Sharma was the right hand of Abu Salim, on the other hand, he was the best friend of Mulayam Singh Yadav. So, imagine it. It's not going to be easy to arrest this man. It's not going to be easy to arrest the man who has strong connections with the underworld on one hand and is protected by Mulayam Singh Yadav on the other. Strong underworld connections and strong political connections. Eventually, the owner of the helicopter was traced. His name was Suresh Rao, and he owned a company called Pushpak Aviation Private Limited in Mumbai. The company used to rent out helicopters to politicians, especially during election season. So, in the 90s, when Romesh Sharma decided to contest elections, I don't have to say how, he was, which party and whose friend he was. He decided to rent a helicopter from Suresh Rao, from Pushpak Aviation. And they need the helicopters. They have to attend 5-6 rallies a day. They usually hop from one rally to another in helicopters. After the elections was over, Romesh Sharma simply refused to return the helicopter. And when Suresh Rao's managers came looking for it, he thrashed them. When Suresh Rao came looking for it, he thrashed him also, threatened him, told him, "Jante nahi ho main kaun hu? मैं अबू सलीम का दोस्त हूँ और मुलायम सिंह यादव का भी दोस्त हूँ." So poor Suresh Rao, frightened out of his wits, quietly went back to Bombay and forgot the helicopter, worth crores forever. Having tracked down Mr. Suresh Rao, IPS officer Neeraj Kumar's next thing was to somehow convince Suresh Rao to file an actual complaint. You cannot do anything unless an actual complaint has been filed. So they sat down and spoke to Suresh Rao and somehow convinced him, go back to the Chhattarpur farmhouse for one last time, for our sake. Go and demand your helicopter. And as soon as he beats you, come back and file a complaint at the house khas station. We can do something only if somebody files a complaint. So Suresh Rao agreed. He went back to the Chhattarpur farmhouse and demanded his helicopter. As expected, Romesh Sharma's goons thrashed him. He came back, black and blue, to the House Khas police station and filed a complaint. Based on that, matters were taken up, but it was not easy. They spent months tracking this man, tracking everybody he meets, tapping his phone lines, tracking all his movements, tracking his various properties, building up a case. It took months and months and months before they finally had enough evidence to go. So they raided the farm. And guess what? When they raided the farm, we all know that usually, mattresses are filled with currency notes. We have all seen those scenes. Rip the mattress and bundles of currency notes fall out. Rip the sofa and notes and notes. In this case, when they ripped the mattress, it was not currency notes. It was hundreds and hundreds of property papers. The man had illegally occupied hundreds of properties all over India. So they ripped the mattress. It was full of fake or illegal property papers. So somehow they arrested Romesh Sharma. But this is the interesting part that I actually want you to hear. I'll read this. Just listen. Okay, and this is where Neeraj Sharma says, in my 37 years of police service, I have come across a number of colleagues, let alone giving credit to the rightful officer. These people go one step further and steal the credit for somebody else's work. Me and my team had worked for months together, tapping phone lines and, trailing people and trailing contacts and building up a case against Romesh Sharma. But immediately after his arrest, the very next day, I was in for a rude shock. Some other IPS officer who had done nothing had called a press conference, and he was sitting there in front of all the newspapers and all the TV cameras saying he had arrested Romesh Sharma. The IPS officer who had done nothing was sitting there saying, वो ना मैं रात रात भर जागा, वो ना हम सब ने बहुत मेहनत किया, वो ना मैं यहाँ से वहाँ भागा. And the entire team that actually did all the work is still cooling their heels. However, one or two investigative journalists knew the truth. Investigative journalists have their own sources. So some of the investigative journalists who knew the truth went ahead and gave credit to me and my team when they published the stories. This irked that Mr. ex-IPS officer even more. So he went and complained to my boss that I was stealing credit for his work. How many of you have had this happening to you in your own life? I know, on this group, I know at least 3 people to whom it has actually happened. Just imagine, you have done all the hard work and suddenly some man comes and says, Sara kaam maine kiya. How would you feel? And the bigger question, should you just step back and say, Bhagwan sab dekh raha hai, Bhagwan aaj nahi to kal use saza dega? Or should you actually go ahead and give 2 tight slaps to the man who is trying to steal, your hard work, who is taking credit for something that you have put effort into? I'll give you the book. You can see how IPS officer Neeraj Kumar handled it. But just tell me, hasn't it happened to many of you? You do all the hard work and somebody takes the credit. How does it feel? And how do you deal with it? Think about it. Okay? Bye bye.